And he said, why do you want to do genetics? Okay, because I'm sure genetics will make a difference in Africa. He said, well, do you think it's needed in Africa? And I say, I don't know at this point of time, but you don't know either. But if you train me, we're going to figure it out together.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Global Health Unfiltered, a podcast about the unspoken realities about global health in Africa and the world. I am Ulrich Sidney Kemunier, and I'm here with my co-host Desmond. Hello, Desmond.
Hello, everyone.
In today's episode, we discuss genetic research as it pertains to the African genome. So, joining us today to talk about this topic is a well-renowned geneticist, Professor Ambroise Wonkam. Professor Ambroise Wonkam is a professor of genetic medicine and director of the McKusick-Nathans Institute of Genetic Medicine at Johns Hopkins University. Professor Wonkam received his medical training from the Faculty of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University of Yaoundé I. He completed a thesis in medical sciences from the University of Geneva in Switzerland and a Ph.D. in human genetics from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. He has also received training as a specialist medical geneticist from the University of Switzerland. Professor Wonkam is very well seasoned researcher with more than 190 peer-reviewed publications. His research interests are focused on genomics as modifiers of sickle cell disease, genetics of hearing loss, and the ethical and educational issues with human genetics in Africa. Over the past decade, Professor Wonkam has successfully led numerous National Institute of Health and Wellcome Trust funded projects, accounting for upwards of 20 million US dollars. And his research projects have spanned numerous African countries, including Tanzania, Cameroon, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda, Mali, Sudan, Rwanda, and Ghana. He has numerous leadership positions at eminent societies and journals, including as a faculty scholar of the Human Genome Organization, but also journals like the American Journal of Human Genetics and other very prestigious journals. So we welcome and thank you for joining us today, Professor Wonkam.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine to join your team and to join your show.
So starting off, your career path is one that is very particular, and would like to know how did you get into medicine and then genetics?
How do I get into medicine? That's difficult to say. When I did high school in a small town in Cameroon called Bafoussam, and at the end of the high school, we had to compete for various training opportunity. I believe I chose medicine because it was the most prestigious at the time. I don't think I had anyone around me as parents to say I inspired my parents to do it, but I do remember at least one professor of medicine who at the time was professor of medicine in Yaoundé, and his name was Zonkanyi. And I saw him in a TV interview, and he was speaking to what he does. He looked extremely white and wise to me because of his white hair to some extent. And also, he was very calm in the way he was projecting his knowledge. And that was part of the people that really kind of pointed that direction to medicine to me. Sometimes things are not random. The funny thing is that I did my thesis in the field of his specialty, urology. He was the president of my thesis committee in Yaoundé. And he also gave me my diploma as a doctor. He never knew this, so I'm telling this story because he's not more here, but he don't know all the story.
Well, good to see that he inspired you to get into medicine. And so, I mean, regarding genetics, I would think that at that point in time when you graduated from the Faculty of Biomedical Sciences in Yaoundé, it wasn't one of the most popular career paths. So how did you come on from FMS Bay to genetics?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the I would start to say I always see myself as an academic. That hasn't changed. I think since the high school, I always saw myself as an academic, whether it's medicine or in anything else. When I did finish my training as a doctor, I thought that the best way of being in academic was to have a proper training in research and in basic research. The reason why I moved from medicine to cell biology and spent 3 years of my life studying mice in Geneva, and that was very unusual because most of my peers would have liked to go to surgery, pediatric, and clinical specialty. When I finished my thesis at the time, I realized that it would be difficult for me to do exactly what I learned in Geneva if I want to work in the context of Africa. I developed a transgenic mice at the time, looking for the pancreas of a transgenic mice. It was a very successful thesis. Actually, it was the best thesis of the university that year. So I won a prize called Dembe Pina for that thesis. And I wanted to go back to do a clinical specialty that may allow me to do both research and continue my clinical activity. That way, I saw the light to some extent because I was on a corridor and randomly I saw a panel labeled Journée portes ouvertes en génétique medical. Of course, I have no idea what was it. I never knew that it was a new specialty. And I went there to listen. And when I listened, I just realized that this is what I should do. Because when I did cell biology, I use a lot of molecular techniques and a lot of microscopy, and both techniques could be used in genetics. And when I think what really allowed me, and I'm saying it because perhaps some people may use the same example, the boldness that I had at the time was to run to the head of department door and knock at his door and say, I want to do genetics and I want to be trained by you. And he asked me why didn't I request an appointment through the secretary? I said, no, you are not going to give me if I have requested because you don't know me and I'm not referred by anyone. And he said, why do you want to do genetics? Okay, because I'm sure genetics will make a difference in Africa. He said, well, do you think it's needed in Africa? And I say, I don't know at this point of time, but you don't know either. But if you train me, we're going to figure it out together. So I saw a little smile. I know I won the conversation. So, and the rest is history.
That's an amazing story about, I guess the testament of being bold. You said you wanted to do genetics and you approached your professor and he asked why, and you said you don't know. But I'm curious now, after many, many years of doing this, why, what answer have you come up to that question? Why is studying genetics so important in Africa and the African context?
So let's say when I started initially in my second year of training, I think my mentor at the time asked me, what do you want to do as a niche of research? And I told him at the time, actually, I don't need to think about a niche. The need I already know is already chosen because as an African, I have to do sickle cell disease as a research topic. My father taught us when growing up that you need to have three objectives in life generally. And I say to everybody that want to listen to it because I think this is a philosophy that I still use even now. The first objective is to be useful to yourself. Don't do things that will hurt you. The second is to be useful to your family. Do things that will be good for your family. And the third is to do things that will be useful for your nation. I always see my nation as the African nation without borders and extending actually to the diaspora as well. And that the way I saw African nation. I remember I used to be the lead of a club when I used to be in Switzerland. And one of the rules in the club was that we are not going to say we are Cameroonian or Ghanaian. We're going to say we are African from the region of Cameroon. We are African from the region of Ghana. And to build a perception of Africa that is unique. So sickle cell was the most common genetic condition in Africa, amongst African. I had no option than to do that. So when I was looking at doing sickle cell, we had three main objective, and it's still the same objective I have even today. We wanted to know how can we use sickle cell disease for prevention. So that's how, for example, I introduced genetic diagnostic before birth in Cameroon. I did the same in South Africa. We wanted to use genetics for secondary prevention by looking at genetic variant that may allow to say this kid is highly likely to develop a kidney disease. So we have published on that. We wanted to use genetic for therapeutics, and it's one of the main focus on what I'm doing now at Hopkins by looking at target of new treatment for sickle cell disease. So, but by doing those research, we extended our research to genetic of hearing impairment. And the reason of genetic of hearing impairment is that in my own personal life, I had someone that was affected by hearing impairment, and I wanted to understand the genetic of it. So that was a topic that chose me. It was the reverse. I chose to work on sickle cell, but hearing impairment chose me. So by working on those two fields, first of all, I realized that many things that we were seeing in the lab was very new. For example, for hearing impairment, when I used to work in Geneva, if a child is born deaf, if I test for one gene, it's called connexin 26 gene, it will explain 50% of children that are deaf, that are born deaf. In Africa, it will explain 0%, in Cameroon, Black South African, Black Nigerian, and so on. So that, and we quickly realized that perhaps the way it affects hearing impairment in terms of gene is different. So that's how we push the boundary of that research and realize that the reason why that gene is so prevalent in European and in Asian is because the mutation evolved out of Africa, after part of the humanity that moved out of Africa about 80,000 years ago, a move out of Africa. The first mutation evolved in a region called now Iran and moved from Iran to Asia and to Europe with my population migration. So, and by seeing those, the initial focus of our research moved completely to something much bigger than I was expected. So by picking this example again, it reminds us that we are all African. It reminds us that a small fraction of Africans, the present day European and Asian, move of Africa sometime, but it was just a small fraction of the population. That means that most of the human population at that time remained in Africa, and they remain in Africa with most of the human genome variation. So, and that means that there are some some genes variant that can only be found in Africans because it never moved out of Africa. And that was one of the reasons making African genomic variation what I believe has to be the priority of everyone else. And we missed to having that concept 20 years ago when we developed the Human Genome Project. Again, on other study that we did, we realized that the second reason why we should focus on African genomic variation is the geographical orientation of Africa, north-south. If you are in Egypt, you have a Mediterranean climate. If you are in South Africa, it's close climate to Mediterranean climate. In the middle, in Yaoundé, you have equatorial climate. In all those areas, you have different type of infection. You have different type of food. You have different type of direct environment. When the environment is warmer, you are darker in terms of your skin color. When you have equatorial forest, you have malaria, and malaria put pressure on our genome and created sickle cell disease to some extent to become most common. And we have all those variants that have been selected in Africa, and that can only be specific to the variable geographical and ecology of Africa. So that's the second reason why we should focus on genetic of people with African ancestry. And the third reason, beside the evolutionary genetic and the ecology, is the imperative of equity. So if most variants are within African DNA, and if those variants are not being studied properly, that means that for you and I, in a proper genetic medicine service, we may not be served equally because the variant that affect disease in us will not be the same like in other population and have not been investigated. So that I think the reason why African genetic variation have to be at the center of agenda, not just for Africa, but also to inform the world. Some of those variants that are unknown, that can affect health and disease, are also inform genetic medicine practice across the world.
So recently, you touched on some of these factors in a publication titled Five Priorities of African Genomics Research, the Next Frontier. And you propose research priorities. Could you talk about some of the ways limited research on the African genome has perpetuated health inequity or delayed the progression of science?
I think that's a good question. I think the first priority, first of all, is the understanding of our human history, our common history, as humanity, evolutionary history. I think we evolved as a Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago in Africa. Africans stay in Africa for the past 300,000 years. That means that more you stay on one spot, more you have admixture, more you have migration, more you have changes in your genome, more you have variable, specific variant that are in your genome. And all those variants affect your health, also affect your diseases. If we do not investigate that properly, there is a one part of the whole humanity history, evolutionary history, that is missing. And we haven't yet done that properly. The second reason is that when a human evolved in Africa, we live at the same time like other archaic human that never moved off Africa. One of the archaic human that live in Europe, for example, was the Neanderthal. And the reason why we can read the Neanderthal DNA very well and know its impact on human health is because we can sequence it. And by comparing it, we know that Europeans have 2% and Asian of their DNA content that was derived from the Neanderthal. And this is not just fun, it's not just for science. We know that that 2% is in part responsible for the higher susceptibility of COVID-19 amongst European and Asian as compared to African. Not all African do not have that composition. We know that Ethiopian, for example, have the same 2%. And the reason they have it because there had been a back migration of people moving back to Africa from Asia and from Europe at some point in time. We have, as a human family, to understand that history. We cannot understand it if we do not have the full understanding of African genomic variation. The second reason around the evolution is that some humanoid, unlike the Neanderthal, actually never move out of Africa. We know that 5% about of our genome have something that we call ghost DNA. Actually, it's just to mask our ignorance because we don't even know how to read it. So the only way we will be able to read it is if we are able to sequence those archaic humans from Africa. One of the reasons we cannot do it well is that DNA degrades under tropical climate. So even when we have Lucy, for example, in Ethiopia, it's difficult to extract DNA from the old bones. But techniques have been improving. Last 2 years ago, there is some researcher who discovered a tomb in Cameroon with a few children that was 8,000 years old. And they successfully extracted DNA from those children that was 8,000 years old. That means that more our capacity will improve, better we will understand the way we can extract those DNA, understand our evolutionary history. This is on the evolution. The second reason is genetic medicine practice itself. In our library of life that we call genome, we have 20,000 genes, in other words, 20,000 books. And those books determine what we are as human and also condition the type of disease that we can have. You are all aware of sickle cell disease. That is a changes in the books on chromosome 11 or on shelves 11, for example, if we compare it to a library. We know that for those 20,000 books or 20,000 genes, only 25% of them have been associated to a disease or to a threat, to a threat like being tall or being short. That means that 75% of them, we don't know why they're there. So if I don't know why they're there as a doctor, I'm not going to test them in clinical practice. Our study on hearing impairment, and specifically in Ghana, we discovered 7 new genes associated with hearing impairment. So I would argue that if we extend this type of research to any other genetic condition, we're going to have similar level of discovery. The reason is that again, there are some variants that never move out of Africa. The second reason, Africa is very, very poorly represented in database for genetics. Only about 2% of individual African ancestry are represented in the genomes, in the publicly available genomes. That means that there are still a lot of secret actually that we don't have, and that is harming not only science, but as well medicine.
Prof, you talked about the fact that less than 2% of the African genome is represented in the bio banks. And I wonder if you can discuss the current state of genetic research in Africa. I'm sure over your time you've seen some evolution from when you first went to your professor and said, I want to do genetics. But, can you touch a little bit on the current state and perhaps that evolution of genetic research on the continent?
Yes, when I moved back when I decided against many people advice to go back and work in Africa after my training in Geneva, I initially tried to settle myself in Cameroon, where I was born. And at the time, I wanted to use sickle cell disease as a point of entry of genetic medicine. So we initiated genetic diagnostic before, but as I said earlier, but what I didn't say is that I actually did the first diagnostic in my kitchen in Yaoundé. And if you know where Yaoundé is, we live in not very far away from Ituji. So there was two lessons from that experiment. The first was that actually you can do genetic everywhere. And the second lesson was that it is feasible. But also we quickly realized that the society was not yet ready in terms of ethical implication of what can happen if you do that diagnostic, because sometimes it may result of parents elected for terminating pregnancy. The second thing that we realized when we started was that, first of all, there was very few people doing genetics. There was some genetic research, but mostly oriented for malaria or HIV research, which is all fine, but there was very little for human genome genetic research. So what we did is we convey all those geneticists to a club that we call the Cameroonian Society of Human Genetics. And we worked with the African Society at the time to launch a meeting that happened in Yaoundé in 2009. It was called Frontier in Genetics, with the funding from the NIH and the Wellcome Trust. I'm very, very proud and very privileged to have organized that, because from that meeting, a very important program that was called H3 Africa was born. And H3 Africa was a massive project for about the past 10 years, funded by the NIH from the US and also the Wellcome Trust, and with the ethical leadership of the African Society of Human Genetics. So 10 years back, there was nearly nothing. But in the past 10 years, because of such project, we have more and more geneticists. I think from my lab alone, I think we have trained at least 50 people at the master and PhD level, or MD level for genetics. And some of them are doing very well. I think from my lab, I have at least 3 people as postdoc at the NIH here in the US, which is a testimony of where we come from. And these guys were all trained in my lab in Africa, not at Hopkins. So the time have changed to some extent. But we are not yet where we want to be. We do not yet have enough genetic medicine specialists. Actually, we have only a few centers in Africa that can train genetic specialists, South Africa, maybe in Egypt and in Tunisia. We do not yet have enough lab that can extract DNA and study human genes. We do not yet have enough genetic counselor that can advise patients. So we are still very, very far away on the number that we want to have. For the 1 billion African, we should have perhaps 1 million geneticists. I think the NIH, the 100,000 geneticists, the WHO recommend to have at least 1 geneticist per million people. So that means that we are very far away, even though we have made a lot of strides in terms of training. So I believe we have 3 things to do in the next 10 years as far as Africa is concerned and other continents. The first priority is training and capacity development. We need to have more people trained. The second priority is technology. We need to have people that can read DNA. We need to have people that can interpret DNA, bioinformaticists. And the third priority is advocacy. We need that people that sign on budget knows that genetics is important. Perhaps today is easier to convince than yesterday because the epidemic of COVID-19 have shown that Africa, actually, through the CDC Africa, have shown capacity of organizing a pan-African epidemiological surveillance using genetic technology that is very efficient. And people like Christian Happy from Nigeria or John Hengerson have been extremely show strong leadership, or to Tulio de Oliveira in South Africa to show the world actually the path on how we can control COVID-19. So perhaps the time is right to go back again to politicians in terms of advocacy and to get them recognize that we can use the same technology not only to address human diseases, but also to understand the ecology around us. You may remember probably some fruits or plants that are specific to your village somewhere. We need to have the genome of those plants because when they disappear, we are not even able to reconstitute them anymore. We need to have a massive project for each country that understand our ecology in a very genetic way.
You mentioned the expertise of South Africa, Egypt, and Tunisia. So the Southern African Human Genome Project is one of the biggest programs on the continent. Would you say that other countries should have similar projects, or should they join or support the Southern African Human Genome Program?
I think the answer is that every country should have a similar project, but there need to be a coordination across countries. The reason why each country should have a similar project is that, first of all, we say Africa is extremely diverse. And from one village to the next village in Africa, you have more variation than from one village in Africa and Paris, for example. I'll pick one example. If you are in Yaoundé, if you are talking to a Bantu-speaking person in Yaoundé, let's say someone that speaks Ewondo, you say Za, it means come. You say Muntu, it means someone, a human being. If you move in South Africa and you speak to someone who is Bantu South African, like Nelson Mandela, Xhosa South African, it's the same language. You say Iza, it means come in Xhosa. You say Muntu, it also means someone in Xhosa. These are the exact same people because Bantu South African moved from a region between Cameroon, Nigeria, and Congo about 1,000 and a half years ago and moved down to South Africa. But in the Xhosa people, you don't have sickle cell disease anymore. In the Bantu from Yaoundé, you have sickle cell disease. That means that even within Africa, even within the same ethno-linguistic group, our genomic variation have changed. So you cannot just think that because we have data from South Africa, it will be usable in Cameroon. No. You cannot even say within Cameroon. We just published a paper last week on malaria genes in Cameroon. We studied about 1,000 people. They discovered 2 new genes associated to malaria resistance. But those genes, we were only able to see because we thought that because the diversity within the country is such a way that you cannot even match population from the north to the population from the south. It's not possible. So we did a first analysis within the country, and then we did a second analysis according to ethno-linguistic background, and found that some gene was particularly specific to some population than other population, which make a lot of sense. If you see people like what books call semi-Bantu, which are actually Nubian coming from Sudan, like the Biomedical people, so they will have variant that is very different from variant for people that are Bantu living in the forest, even though there is a high level of admixture. If you look for people in North Cameroon, like the Fulani population actually have a very proof of the possible back migration from Europe. So they are very close, for example, to some Asian people as compared to or Ethiopian people based on the genetic studies. That means that even within the country, we need to have that fine tuning to understand variability within the country. We proposed about a year ago that if we want to understand the genetic variation on the African continent, we need to sequence minimum 3 million Africans across the continent. That's the minimum. We still believe that is the right number, We still believe that that sequence need to go along ethno-linguistic line, but also along geographic lines in the way we say Bantu from South Africa and Bantu from Cameroon do not share some of the variant. For example, sickle cell, we find sickle cell disease nature in Italian people. So that means that just for that condition, someone who is Bantu in Central Africa is closer to Italian, that he is closer to his Bantu brother from South Africa. So it's a concept that I publish and call dissociation between anthropology, genetic, and culture. You might be from the same culture, anthropology, but your genetic can be different because you have evolved with the environmental pressure.
So just building on some of what you mentioned earlier about the fact that when you came back to Cameroon, the population wasn't exactly ready to assimilate the information, the genetic information, and like the ethical considerations regarding, for example, sickle cell diagnosis. Would you say 10, 20 years now away from that event, that the local populations are more aware or have been educated towards better uptake of research findings and diagnostic findings regarding genetics?
No, I wouldn't take it as an education issue. No, it's not an education issue. It is an ethical issue. What we initially thought was around using prenatal genetic diagnostic, and that opened a door for reproductive option, including termination. But when we study social science approach study, we realize that the perception of severity, for example, we compare the severity using a certain number of criteria, everybody will say it's a very severe condition. Amongst doctors, amongst parents, but also amongst adult patients that live with sickle cell disease. But now if you have a child, I don't know, someone that is pregnant, and if it's your own child, and will you be open for termination if he is affected for sickle cell disease? The doctor will say, no, this is a treatable condition. The parent say yes. So because most of those parents have one affected child, so they felt the heat of growing up a child with sickle cell. My surprise, these are real data, and my surprise was that adult patients to the 40% level also say they were comfortable. So if you take these three group of stakeholders, their attitude to just that technique is very different. But we performed the same study in South Africa, and we have a completely different picture. The parent in South Africa will still say, okay, let's do it, the technique, but we are not going to consider any way like termination compared, for example, to parent in Nigeria or in Cameroon. And the only reason was the capacity of South Africa to offer optimal care to patients. So the conclusion was that you offer optimal care, you're going to just, the ethical issue will disappear. So we move our focus rather to do a research that will allow to better taking care and to find new therapeutic purpose. So it was more an ethical issue and will not disappear. It's still there.
You mentioned that one of the priorities for genetic research is capacity, building capacity, providing more training, and clearly there's a disparity in capacity between research institutions in the US or Hopkins, for example, where you are, and University of Yaoundé, for example. So I wonder if you can comment on the partnerships that you've been a part of between high-income countries and low-income countries in terms of increasing capacity for genetic research on the continent.
So the first thing that my view on partnership is that first of all, science is a common goal and common good for humanity. I don't think I know because of difference in resources, some setting may have more command on science than others. But I still think that even those resource places that will have less resources, that contribution should be respected. And I can say it because I've worked in a relatively low resource for a very long time. And their contribution, both in terms of innovation, the type of question that they ask, like I have asked myself while working in Africa, but also in terms of the type of new data they can provide. So I think the collaboration internationally should happen along those lines so that a form of respect is underlying the collaboration. People should say what is the specificity that you are bringing forward, but not necessarily put too much weight, which is the case now, on the financial funding capacity and also technical capacity. If we look at it in that angle, collaboration will be much more easier. And the way I believe we have been successful of getting funded consistently is the messaging. I think we have always worked towards saying we have a common goal of understanding our genome. If you help me doing that study in African population, you're going to help yourself because there will be discovery that help your own population. It never been you need to support me or to help me because I'm working in Africa. No, I will never go with that type of language because every single thing that any African scientist is doing is respectable. We just need to find a common ground where we'll say we all have interest of this work to be done. Yes, I agree with you. We need to build those bridges, and without the bridges, we will never have been able to do the type of work we've done. We have a strong support from the American government through the NIH or from the British government through the Wellcome Trust, but still the contribution that any single other scientist from a relative resources poor area is critical, just in terms of even the population that they're bringing forward.
And what about the African governments? Have you seen any inclination towards more funding coming from our local governments?
Yes, I get that question all the time. I think the answer is probably not much because there are other priorities. But I'll take one real life example that happened to me when I was trying to work in Cameroon. I went to see the Minister of Health at the time, and I met him before. I met him when I was still in Geneva, and I said, okay, I would like to set a genetic service. And he told me that his priority was HIV and malaria. And he's right, because that's the most high burden condition. And that he's not ready to put that much money in rare disease. And my next question to him was that how do you handle those children that are born from pregnant woman who was HIV positive? And the story short, it took like 18 months to do the Western blot testing at the time. And I said, okay, if you provide me a genetic lab, I will provide you the answer in 2 days because I'm going to use the copy numbers of genetic material of HIV in the blood of the child to know if he's been affected or not. And immediately he saw the interest. And based on that, he equipped at least numerous hospitals to do that for HIV prevention and security of transfusion. So I'm just saying that the resources are there. It's not that they're not there. And I remember that was an investment of $500,000. So it's just the way priority are set and the way priority are misunderstood by the decision makers. So I'm trying to say Africa is not poor. Africa do have resources. We just probably need to convince people to use resources differently. Let's always remember that 1/3 of the mineral resources of the world are within the soil of Africa. There are a few countries that has a direct political will. Some of those countries are, of course, South Africa, that they devote about 1.5% of their GDP to research. Other country, evolving country are Rwanda, that follows up about the same trend. And those countries have invested a lot in genetics. So it's not surprising that, for example, the Omicron, the variant in COVID-19 was discovered in South Africa because they were already investing a lot in terms to equip their country with genetic capacity. And similarly, we're going to see that in Rwanda, we're going to see the same in Nigeria as well. And more in Ghana, actually. I think my good friend, Dr. Gordon Awandari, have set a very solid genetic center in Wakbit at the University of Accra. So they are more and more with political will, but of course, it's far, very far from where we would like to see.
So Prof, I would like to believe that somewhere on the continent, a young kid or a young medical student will watch this or listen to this and think that Professor Wonkam is very wise, although you don't have the white hair, and that they'll probably want to reach out to you to train in genetics as well. So before we wrap up, how can that young person perhaps reach out to you, how can he or she make sure that they get that kind of opportunity to be useful to them, their family, and their nation?
Yeah, I'll be very hesitated to share my contact detail, but of course it's very because I will receive 1 million of emails and I will not respond to them, and then people say he's not very kind. And actually, I will not respond because I have a lot of pressure of responding to those emails. No, but what I will do is that we are always open in a similar way we are doing this interview, because we always think that in a similar way we heard some words from people that inspire us, that help us grow, that maybe one word may inspire someone somewhere else. And if people believe in what they can achieve, there's always room for them to dream and to achieve. And if you don't dream, you will never achieve. So never get your dream low, get it always very high, and try to work toward it daily. And there will always be a hand somewhere that will be given to you to help you pull your dream. So there are numerous people across the continent that do the type of work that I do. People can, for example, write to the African Society of Human Genetics. There's a website online. Wherever the country they are, they will have a representative in their own country that will guide them to do genetic research. We have such country representative in each of the country. When they get academically closer to it, for example, to a master level, they continue reaching. So we have a young investigator forum there that is extremely active. And I think those young investigator forum will be much more useful than myself, because of many other commitments that don't allow me to be very responsive on some emails and messages and so on. But really the bottom line is that believe in yourself and nothing should stop you. I keep saying to people here, one thing in Western society sometimes is what they call prestige, right? And if you are from Harvard or from Boston or from Hopkins, it's associated with some level of prestige if you are trained there. I keep saying to people, I was trained in Yaoundé University, that is not wrong, but they haven't stopped me to be professor and director of the premier institute of genetics in the United States. So it doesn't really matter where you are, but do it as best as you can do. Do it as good as you can do, but never have your standard low. Never.
Well, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today. We appreciate all that you've shared with us, and we look forward to reading more of your research, not only from Hopkins, but also from the H Street project. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure and a privilege to share some of our experience with you guys.
Thank you very much, Prof.
This episode was brought to you by a Promoting Decolonization Using Innovative Knowledge Practices grant, awarded by Oxford University's Center for Tropical Medicine and Global Health.